Welcome to another episode of Loadsmart's First Look, a monthly series that dives into the freight markets and the latest technologies that are changing the supply chain. I've been excited for this one for quite some time. We're joined by Kyle Lintner, Managing Director of K-Ratio. Kyle has risen to become a well-respected thought leader in respect to his market commentaries, notably his actionable insights for the future throughout this turbulent market in 2020. Kyle, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to mix it up a little bit different, mix it up this time around and introduce a brief segment at the beginning that we're going to call Lightning Round. And then after that, we're going to transition to really what I think is going to be some really interesting discussion, looking at the future of freight, but from a little bit different backdrop of Kyle's background in the financial industry. So jumping in now, outbound tender volume index will stay above 15,000 throughout the entirety of 2020.
False, but not by much.
Tender rejections will drop below 20% by the end of the year.
False.
Tender rejections will drop below 10% in Q1.
Yeah, that one's a really tough one. False, but very, very close.
Interesting. Going to capacity, truckload supply capacity in the marketplace will end the year below where we went into the year. So capacity will drop in 2020.
No, false.
Shippers will opt to move a smaller percentage of their volume under annual contracts in 2021 than previous.
They will not put more stuff into spot, even though sometimes I think that does. Flex contracts, option contracts, spot business, whatever you want to call it. They're going to run it all through dedicated.
Okay. Hottest freight trend in 2021 will be?
More visibility.
I want to shift gears to really the meat of this discussion here. Kyle, and you were a trader in the finance world for most of your career until really moving towards the freight industry a couple of years ago. What introduced you to the freight markets? What brought you into this industry?
Yeah, it's a little bit of an interesting story. So a longtime friend of mine, actually an old roommate in college, was an executive at a mid-sized trucking company here in Chicago. And I've just been doing my own things, happily trading different financial markets. And in advance of the freight futures market, he had read some literature from FreightWaves right when they were getting started. He actually had just come back from the very first conference they ever had when they announced the new upcoming freight futures market. He called me up and said, "Hey, there's this new marketplace opening. Would you mind just taking a look at what we have on our books here as far as risk is concerned at that small trucking company?" I said, "Sure, come in and try and teach you guys what's going on and what this looks like as far as your company's concerned and who the other competitors would be." Naively, I didn't know exactly how logistics or freight worked. And I started asking some questions to try and see how this stuff fit into place. And when he started throwing out some of the numbers at me about the size of it, 800 plus million, amount of companies that were participating and how broad it was, I started to get interested. And then really when he said, and currently all of this is non-binding, meaning contract is not really a contract, it's just kind of paper rates, handshake agreements, companies can fail 10 to 15% of the time on primary and still maintain. He started throwing out all those words and phrases at me. It blew my mind.
Why do you think it took so long to adopt or try to bring some of the principles from the finance industry to the freight market?
Yeah, I think that it's a factor of just how big the market really is. So if it's this size, and people throw out all kinds of different statistics, but you can throw out some of them, and then no one trucking company is more than 2% of the market, no brokerage is more than 2% of the market, those kinds of things. Yeah, and then you get at the other side of it, 91% of all truck companies are 6 trucks or less. So those are usually used to display the amount of fragmentation inside of the marketplace. But really, I think it's the breadth of the marketplace. And what I mean by that is so many companies can survive and can exist just because there's so much business to be done. It's one of those scenarios where you can just throw bodies at the problem. So that allows for the inefficiencies and some of the slack, I call it, in the marketplace that we see. You just need someone to move the freight, right?
What do you think needs to happen in the freight market to achieve this similar rate of acceleration in digital transactions?
You mentioned the trading floor, and that's one of those things that people that know me ask about because I make a lot of comparisons between this industry and the previous one I was in. I witnessed that revolution and that digitization firsthand. I was one of those people, if anyone is old enough to have seen Trading Places, that was standing in a pit, yelling and screaming and writing on paper all day long. I was not hesitant to change, and I did not resist when computerization came around, and I had to make a transition from standing on the floor and yelling to sitting at a desk and clicking a mouse. I enjoyed that. It allows you to do that from anywhere you want in any clothing that you want, but a lot of people didn't. And those that resisted and were hesitant to change are the ones that couldn't make the transition. And I see a lot of that happening in this industry as well. If you think about just how business was actually conducted, people were yelling and screaming and writing on paper to conduct trades. If we think of freight now from a brokerage standpoint of matching a carrier with a load, that's the same thing. It used to be done 1-800 dial a truck. If we think of DAT, now we have other people in this atmosphere that are trying to do the same stuff digitally that they had done in the financial world. So if you can match John Smith carrier with ABC shipping and do it digitally and do it faster, you've reduced your overhead and your cost, very similar to financial transactions. It doesn't cost you anything now. You don't have to have the same manpower employed to do so. And it allows you to be far more accurate. And then you get the second and third order effects when you're doing all these things digitally as far as what you can record and learn from a data perspective. So, it's very, very interesting for me to have already seen this once and not to be a part of it on the second end. It's something that I think is going to happen regardless. And I think the more people get on board with this, the sooner, the better that we're all going to be. And obviously the better they're going to be.
How do we get there, right? What do you think needs to happen to accelerate this rate?
Standardization of policies and practices. Really that's what allows other industries to move faster, I think, than freight, because there are best practices accepted by the entire industry, or there's some sort of loose government watchdog that says, look, this is how we're going to do it. Got a little taste of that with ELDs. That mandate came in and everyone has to have it. So now the providers servicing that device are some of the biggest players inside of the data space. But until we have everybody at least agreeing what trucks need to carry on board, it's going to be hard to say this will be the uniform standard that we're going to deal with data, and these are the categories that we're going to record without infringing on personal privacy rights. Because that's one thing that we hear truck drivers complain about. They don't want to feel like some sort of robot or someone that's constantly tracked 24/7, and that is very understandable. At the same time, they're hauling someone else's goods in the back of their trailer, so there's somewhat of a give and touch or a give and play with that as far as who has the rights to what. But once I think that gets ironed out, now we can get into the assimilation of all of the data regarding the truck as far as where it is and when it is. Once we have that, I think the other aspects of data, whether it's shipment data from either a broker or a shipper, those are fairly more standard, because now you have some uniformity in the players in that space as far as who's running them and what they're trying to achieve. If we can match those two together, if we can figure out when and where trucks are combined with what we have from shipment side data, now we get to have all of those fun ideas about optimization.
So you would say, some sort of centralization or even oversight, right? I think of LIBOR, right? Like a central agreed upon a principle that, businesses trade on.
So if we do have something out there, I know you mentioned LIBOR, and that's a good way to think about it. If we had basically a central clearinghouse of rates where everyone submitted, or at least a large enough market share submitted price data, and we had an average daily published rate. And now we can take that one step further, and that daily published rate becomes something we can conduct business on. You can have agreements between a shipper and a provider where that daily published rate serves as the base, and then a layer of service or margin is applied on top of that. This way there is never any dispute on what a load was really worth. You can go back to that cost plus or market plus type model where you're just agreeing to do the business and you'll let it float at whatever that rate may be. And the next order effect on that is we can now get into financial transactions on top of that, because you can create futures indexes on top of those daily published rates similar to LIBOR. And now we have a risk management tool that can reduce balance sheet risk for any of those same participants that are just conducting their operational business off that same rate.
This is a massive industry with a lot of old school thought still entrenched in it. What do you think what's the biggest challenge for us to I guess centrally agree upon this path?
I do see it happening only because it makes too much sense and because it happens in every other business. As far as when it happens here, the adoption is slow because of the same problems that we've highlighted earlier as far as just tracking data. or even optimizing your own business. This is a slow to change industry. I think it happens when not only obviously we reach some sort of critical mass and market share, but really when the shippers realize that they have all of the power in this, and we have one or two large shippers say, this is what we want. Anyone who's going to do business with us has to do it this way. Then suddenly everybody gets in line and says, okay, fine.
Well, Kyle, this is fascinating. Thanks so much. Really enjoyed it. Look forward to hopefully doing a recap maybe in Q1.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me, Jim.